For several years, in fact, my colleagues and I have been arguing that ideological differences emerge, at least in part, because of psychological reasons. So Jack Glaser, Aryeh Kruglansky, Frank Sulloway and I, for example, published in 2003 a quantitative or meta-analytic review of all the studies that we could find going back to the 1950s that had investigated cognitive and motivational style differences underlying political orientation. So as I mentioned before, going all the way back to the French Revolution, it appears that conservative ideology has differed from liberal ideology in two major ways. First, in its general preference for stability and social order over social change, and second, in its relative acceptance of social and economic inequality or hierarchy as natural and or legitimate. And we hypothesized that these conservative preferences for stability and hierarchy would be enhanced whenever the motivations to reduce uncertainty and threat are heightened for either dispositional, personality, or situational or environmental reasons. This is because stability and hierarchy, we think, inherently provide reassurance and structure, whereas social change and equality imply greater chaos and unpredictability, and that people may be unwilling or unable psychologically to take that on when they're feeling threatened or experiencing aversive levels of uncertainty. So it follows that the psychological appeal of conservative leaders and opinions should be strengthened when needs to reduce uncertainty and threat are relatively high, and the appeal of liberal leaders and opinions should be strengthened when these needs are low. So to investigate these ideas, my colleagues and I reviewed 88 different studies that have been published between 1958 and 2002 involving over 22,000 different research participants or cases from 12 different countries, and as diverse a range of studies as we could find. And consistent with our theory, what we found is that aggregating across dozens of different studies involving many different research teams in, as I mentioned, different countries, different time periods, and so on, that the motivation to reduce uncertainty was indeed correlated with political orientation. So specifically, personal needs for order, structure, and closure, the avoidance of ambiguity, these psychological characteristics were all positively associated with political conservatism or negatively associated with liberalism, whereas integrative complexity, openness to new experiences, and tolerance for ambiguity and uncertainty were all positively correlated with liberalism or negatively correlated with conservatism. And similarly, again, aggregating across dozens of different studies, the data revealed that greater fear of threat and loss, greater death anxiety, and greater system instability were all positively associated with political conservatism or negatively associated with liberalism. These core differences between left and right or liberal and conservative are related to another difference that my students, colleagues, and I have identified, namely that conservatives tend to score more highly on measures of system justification. What is system justification? Well, we've defined it in terms of conscious and unconscious motivation to defend, bolster, and justify aspects of the societal status quo. That is, the psychological desire to see the social system as fair, legitimate, and desirable. And so the basic idea is that people are motivated to varying degrees, depending upon their situations and their personalities, to exaggerate the system's virtues and to downplay its vices. And we measure this system justification tendency in a number of different ways, including with questionnaires where we simply ask people relatively simple questions to indicate their degree of agreement or disagreement with certain statements, including, in general, the political system works as it should, and society is set up so that people usually get what they deserve. things that refer to both economic and social or political kinds of arrangements, and whether people experience them as relatively fair and just or not. And we find really quite robust correlations between scores on these measures of system justification, again, whether it's measured with regard to economic institutions and arrangements or social or political institutions and arrangements, in that conservatives tend to score significantly higher than liberals do on this motivation to engage in system justification. We also find that conservatives tend to hold significantly more favorable attitudes toward a wide range of symbols and institutions that are part of mainstream or the status quo, including big corporations, rich people, institutionalized religion, politicians, the government, corporations, the police, the military, and so on. And they're more likely to have more favorable attitudes toward the state they live in, toward the country as a whole, toward fellow Americans. They're more likely, in fact, to have American flags hanging in their rooms, in their bedrooms, and in general, to have more positive attitudes towards symbols of the status quo.